Lydia. Hey,
Hey guys.
everybody. Welcome
Hey.
to Real Hawk Talk. This is episode, I think, 27. This is Brian Nemhauser, one of your hosts, along with the Hawk Blogger crew. You've got Jeff Simmons, who is up in Toronto, at Real Jeff Simmons on Twitter. You've got Evan, fiance to be, currently married to be. And he is at Evan on HB on Twitter. That's the only thing you're going to know about Evan. The rest of
Good to be married.
That's awesome.
Nathan Ernst, who is, gosh, Nathan, yours is always hard. It's like at Nathan 11 or something.
Nathan E11. It's very complicated.
Dude, I don't know. I think you might need to rethink that handle.
It might be time.
At Nathan, capital E11, for all you Twitter trivia buffs out there. It's a great follow. And special guest tonight is Lydia Cruz. So we're really happy to have you here, Lydia. Thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's been a while. We're trying to get this arranged. I know you've got kind of crazy early hours, and you started working on the Brock and Salk show a little while ago, and we're going to talk to you about all sorts of fun stuff. But if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little rundown of how you got involved in that show and the kind of work you're doing for Brock and Salk.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had the great fortune of interning for them first. So that was, I worked in Top 40 radio, actually, for 4 years. I used to work for Move 92.5 I worked on the Brook and Jubal Morning Show for 4 years. Strangely won my job in a contest, which I went to school for something entirely different, for developmental psychology, and ended up entering a contest for a radio job, and it turned into a 4-year gig. Didn't re-sign my contract there. Actually went back to school for sports journalism, and that's when I interned with Brock and Salk over the summer, and they ended up hiring me about, I don't know, 8 months later as I was just leaving school. So yeah, I've been there just about a year now, and it's been pretty fantastic. Yeah, get to talk sports. Do have a little bit of a crazy schedule, but it's worth it. So
cool. And what kind of work are you doing on the show?
Yeah, so I host the hour before Brock and Salk. It's called The Blitz. It's 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And that is just by myself. So I'm kind of a one-person, one-woman show. I'm the board op, I'm the producer, I'm the host. And then for Brock and Salk, I get to help do a little like co-production / I'm their board op. Yeah, so it's fun. It's a really fun, dysfunctional family, and it's a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to get to know both those guys. They're both, great parts of the Seattle sports landscape.
They are.
And they're really interesting pairing together. So it's been great to have
them. Good odd coupling,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually want to ask a little bit more about, your background, how you got into what you're doing. But I think everybody's going to want to know, like, you're killing all of us on backdrop for this episode. You are clearly a hardcore Seattle sports fan. Take us through a little bit of what's going on behind you in this room.
So that is actually that is between like me and my dad. That is like the sports collection, the bobblehead. Obviously, we're huge baseball fans. So my mom's side of the family, they're from St. Louis. So actually grew up listening and watching Cardinals games a lot when I was younger, but also a huge Mariners fan. So we've got some of the bobblehead collection back there. And I finally took them out of their boxes. They had been in their boxes the whole time. So that happened. And then, yeah, some of the bats from over the years, the Mother's Day stuff that they've done and the other auctions that they've done. So it's a little bit of the baseball collection that we've got. It's not quite as prolific on the football front, sadly, but
yeah, I noticed in your Twitter profile, your background it looks like a Kendall Gill jersey.
Yes,
Is that what that is?
Yes. Okay. So my mom went to Illinois too. So I watched a little of him there, but then he was one of my favorite players when he played with the Sonics. So I still got the Kendall jersey. I've got some weird Sonics gear. I was weirdly obsessed with Luke Ridnour. So I still got my Luke Ridnour jersey. Yeah,
Well, I have to ask, Evan is one of the big Sonics fans on this show. I'm a Trailblazers fan, so I'm going to allow this for a little while, but I will limit it at some point. So, Evan, do you even know who Kendall Gill is? Were you like born when he was playing?
I don't even know what that name was. I have no idea. Completely clueless.
Okay. It's okay. Like I said, I had some weird taste, so it's all right.
Well, I think I saw some fist pumping when you said Luke Ridnour. Would you care to explain that, Evan?
Yeah, no, I just grew up going to Sox games with my dad, and before I was a Seahawks fan or a Mariners fan, I was a huge basketball fan, and I just remember Luke Ridnour being the most painfully mediocre player, and I just loved him to death. I loved him to death. So huge fan.
No, I think that's exactly probably what I loved about him. I just I don't even know what, but it's when you're younger and you just are attracted to a player for no good reason. That was definitely the case with Luke. So.
Sorry, I'm still laughing at captions that people are adding to Evan's picture that I posted on Twitter. So Lydia, you've got a really eclectic background. You started even just talking about it from, you were interning, you worked for a few years, you've come on, you're now doing hosting and production, but you're also a stand-up comic. Like, what is that real, or is that just a Twitter,
Okay, well, the caption in my Twitter is one-time stand-up comedian, so it should be that I should clarify that. But when I worked at Move In, I worked with several comedians over there. So they were always like, hey, you should try in like 5 minutes, open up, like just do like a tight five. You can do it. That's of course the comedic slang. It would be like tight five. You can do a tight five, can't you? And I was like, no, I'm not great at public speaking, which is weird, right? Because if you're in the radio biz, you think that would automatically translate, but no, I get way nervous when I have to speak in public. So I finally got talked into it by a comedian friend, Brian Nemhauser, who actually worked with Cairo for a little while, who he just got a job in LA, working in LA radio actually, but he's a stand-up comedian, and he convinced me to open for him at the Comedy Underground. So that was my one foray into stand-up comedy. I would do it again though, actually, surprisingly. Once you get the first time out of the way, you're like, okay, I could maybe do this.
How did it go? I mean, that sounds terrifying.
It is, especially when he was like 2 weeks before, he was like, so we're thinking maybe like more like a 15. Could you do like a 15-minute set? And I was like, no. I did end up doing it, but I'd had a few drinks beforehand. That was
I think we all had a few drinks or something.
That was, yeah, necessary part of it. Yeah. But
awesome. Well, so I know a lot of folks that follow this show, have been curious curious about how a number of our guests have gotten into the industry, and I know you're like just starting, as you ascend into it. Can you kind of share a little bit about, was there any logical path that you went through, and any tips that you have for people that are interested in kind of following in your path and your footsteps?
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest thing I've learned, well, it's so much about relationships, and a lot of it is about networking. So if you ever have the opportunity to meet someone or go to something or intern for something, whether it's unpaid or paid, I would say that establishing those relationships by whatever means you can was huge for me, and getting my foot in the door. Also, just taking any and all opportunity you can to learn. I'm still probably this person. I get teased for being the yes person, but if somebody is like, hey, do you want to learn this? Do you want to do this? Yes, I do. And whether I have no experience or not, I just usually say yes, whether that's interviewing, whether that's on the production side, whether it's Lydia, do you want to try and make a video? Lydia, do you want to do this? And so I think in sports media and media in general right now, nobody does one thing. You have to be multifaceted. And when I originally got the job, like I had a board op. I had somebody who would, because I would produce and I would host my show, but someone was working the board. And then they're like, hey, Lydia, do you mind also being your own board op? And I was like, that sounds terrifying, but now I'm doing it and it's somehow working. So that would probably be my biggest advice. Just always be willing to learn and to take on something new if you can.
That's great advice, and I would definitely reiterate. So,
yeah,
Jeff, why don't you transition us into talking a little bit about Seahawks stuff? Probably have some more questions about Lydia's, varied background, but there's a lot going on with Seattle right now. So what's top of mind for you?
I think there's Marshawn Lynch in the background there. Is that right?
Yeah, there's lucky Marshawn Lynch. He makes the rounds usually still. He's still a fixture. Game day, he makes an appearance. So, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so I guess the Seahawks are kind of going through like a transition right now, where like they've been that championship team. The team's getting older. They've changed the coaching staff. They might have to start making big changes with the players. What's kind of your view of where the team is right now? How the team gets back to the Super Bowl, or like how comfortable are you with where they are right now as a team?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I wouldn't even call it coaching changes. It's kind of a coaching upheaval. And, definitely the biggest that we've seen in the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era. And honestly, it seems they still have that same identity that they're dedicated to when it comes to when you ask Pete Carroll what their identity is, we play great defense, we run the ball, we pound the rock, and we win the special teams battle. But at the end of the day, their ability to accomplish that, especially in the last couple of years, has been questionable. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you guys felt about all the coaching changes. I felt inspired by some more than the others, but I think the hardest thing now is going to be how do they measure that success? Because you've made all of these changes, but if it doesn't work out in a year, how do you what then? And there's such a short span of how much rope you're allowed to give new coaches. So plus I think we haven't even seen the beginning of all the personnel turnover that's about to happen. And I think that could like free agency and the draft could be absolutely insane this year. So I think identity wise, Pete Carroll still has a very clear picture of what he wants to be, but I'm not as confident anymore if they know how to accomplish that, which is, I think, the first time that I've ever felt that little bit of worry creep into my mind.
Yeah, I think that's very reminiscent of some conversations we've had around this show as well. And I'm curious, you said that some of the changes you were more supportive of than others. You want to say a little bit more, or ones that you particularly liked? Let's stick with that.
Yeah, you could tell I'm kind of an innately positive person. So I try to stay away from bad, good and bad. But I think the progression of the coaching hires is, they've been progressively less inspiring to me. I was totally on board with Solari, and I think Schottenheimer could do some good things, especially for Russell Wilson. But Ken Norton kind of confused me just a little bit. I understand. I've heard the word energy thrown around a lot, I think, when it comes to him. That one's still kind of confuses me. And then hearing the news that Canales is possibly quarterback's coach, I'm a little thrown by that one, because from what we've heard from Pete Carroll is that Russell wants somebody that's going to get on his case and criticize him so that he can become the next level of Russell Wilson, and someone who has, never played quarterback, never coached quarterbacks. That's a little bit of a confusing one to me. I've still got a question mark on that.
Yeah, I'm curious, Nathan, if you have a take on the Canales news. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty confusing to me too, but yeah.
That's quite a take, Nathan.
Oh, no, I mean...
That's why we have Nathan on the show.
Yeah.
That's actually the most we've ever heard from Nathan.
Coming in with the zingers, yeah.
Did you... No, I mean... Would you have felt... Oh, sorry. When you heard possibly Zorn was coming into that conversation, or was there anybody that you felt would be a hire or a better person in that role? I'm curious.
It's hard to know with those position coaches, like just who's out there and what that pool looks like. But Zorn was really exciting to me. I got excited about that. I think he would have been the one I got the most excited about of all the changes they've made.
Yeah.
Well, and say why. I mean, what about Zorn was appealing to you?
Just his history in the league. I mean, he worked with Hasselbeck a lot. I don't know if Evan remembers way back in the early Hasselbeck days, but not always the high caliber player that we kind of remember him to be. And Zorn was a big part of that. And then head coaching experience, dealt with a really bad situation in Washington, but still managed to have some pretty successful offenses, and the teams were actually okay. So I thought that he would just be a really cool hire.
Yeah, I know Brock Yord personally vouched for him too, having been coached by him a little bit as well, and saying that his personality type, his teaching style would have fit in well with the Hawks. So yeah, just kind of that would have been intriguing to me.
Yeah,
that's a name though. Has Brock gotten any traction on the interview circuit?
I know, like on the Monday Night Football circuit, or the
like quarterback coaches.
The quarterbacks. I know, right? Yeah. We were like, ever since that article came out about his Monday Night Football thing, we try to tease him about any possible job opportunity where he might be leaving us possible. So,
well, I thought the Zorn thing was going to be fascinating because, one, I mean, this is a guy he's always been no nonsense. He's not. I mean, if you've ever met him, he's someone who'll just people say what's on his mind. There's not a lot of filter to him, and he's very genuine, and he's very confident in what he knows. He takes the craft really seriously, and I think if I remember right, he's actually he was an All-Pro at some point, or a second team All-Pro, like in the 70s, which it's kind of crazy because I never thought he was that level of quarterback. But, as Nathan said, Hasselbeck swore by him, Brock swore by him. So I was pretty excited about that possibility. I'm curious, Evan, I think you have some history with him or know of him a little bit. Do you think there's a chance that maybe they asked and he was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in going back into coaching?
Yeah, so my history with Jim is just I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and a buddy I know, his quarterback coach in high school was Jim Zorn, and that was in high school. And I remember when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, we had some off the record conversations about Russell Wilson and his techniques, his footwork, all that type of stuff, and Jim was very passionate about Russell Wilson and in areas that he could critique and work on, and I think just looking back to that got me really excited about the potential of Jim Zorn coming in and kind of lighting a fire under Russell Wilson's ass. I was totally cool with that. But, I think there's maybe a dynamic of like wanting to be with family and maybe just not wanting to step back into the league at play here. Who knows? But I share a similar reaction as Nathan. I was really bummed when the Jim news just wasn't positive that he was coming to the Seahawks, just because I was really hoping he would. I think he would have had a great impact on Russ, but we got to give the next guy a chance. But yeah. I
mean, Lydia, I think one of the things that's, my theory about the Canales news is, one, I mean, the wide receiver room was Canales and then Nate Carroll, who is Pete's son, right? And I think that room is pretty tight-knit with Pete and understands what he's looking for. And I think that on this show, there's been some theorizing that when Doug Baldwin spoke out about saying that the problem was not Darrell Bevell, that he was pointing the finger at Russell Wilson. I personally think it was more than that. I think he's pointing the finger at the offensive line. I think he's pointing the finger at young receivers who aren't running the right routes. I think he's pointing at the players in general. But if you take it for a second that he is thinking about Russell, what better than taking the wide receiver coach who understands the angst going on in that room and putting it right next to the quarterback who's trying to connect with them? So I think that, from an accountability standpoint, that could be a boon. Whether he's capable of coaching quarterbacks, maybe that falls more on Schottenheimer,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of precedent of wide receiver coaches becoming quarterback coaches. Like, I know a lot of fans make this mistake where they don't understand a lot of these roles. Like, when someone becomes a head coach from an offensive coordinator, they only look at their offensive coordinator stats when it's a completely different job. If you're a good offensive coach, a lot of the times, just because you're not a quarterback coach, that doesn't mean you're not qualified. Like Bruce Arians, for example, obviously is not our favorite guy. He started in the NFL as a running back coach. And when he started with Pittsburgh, where he really got his head coaching boost, he was the wide receiver coach. Fortunately, when Seattle lost that Super Bowl, Arians was their wide receiver coach, and he became the great quarterback guru.
Whisper, yeah.
Yeah, I refuse to call him that. And I share Mike's view of Bruce Arians. I'm very in line with that. So there's an example of a guy who was a wide receiver coach, became a quarterback guy, developed. So maybe that's the precedent, but yeah, it's not all that common. I'll say that.
So Lydia, I know we've only got you for a little bit longer, and
yeah.
If you could, a couple of questions I had about what was your take on the season in general? And when you exited the season, what are the things that you're focused on the Seahawks trying to improve and change?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I honestly think I'm still in some ways processing what happened this season, but I thought almost making it to the playoffs this year probably would have been the worst thing to happen to us, which sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I think this was a necessary sort of wake-up call or jolt, because we've kind of gotten, I don't know, spoiled or used to that for the last couple of years. And I think that there were flaws in our system, flaws in our identity that we weren't addressing at the time. But because we were maintaining a certain levels of success, that it was all right. But I think that it was probably the worst thing that could have happened to them in terms of these are changes that probably needed to happen, whether it is a complete overhaul of the coaching staff or, as I think, probably the personnel is going to be really intriguing to me. And this draft is going to be really intriguing to me. And I think that if they are able, we've seen that you can turn around a team in a year. We've seen that within our own division, and what the Rams have accomplished, what the 49ers have accomplished. And I don't have any doubts that they can get back to it. I think a lot of people have been more pessimistic about that. And I hate the window closing phrase that I've heard over and over and over again. But I do think that some of these problems really seriously have to be addressed, and you have to be able to run the football. And that.
Yeah, Nathan. You have to be able to run the football. Lydia, welcome to the club. You're on the right side of this argument. So
good. Okay.
Me and Pete Carroll, we'll stick together on this one.
We'll be together, yeah.
Nathan and the other, analytics nerds can be on the other side. It's all right. It's okay. I like not being the analytics nerd. That's usually actually my role. So I'm happy.
Okay. Yeah, I'll join that crew.
So one last question I had, and then I'll, if the guys have any other questions, I'll obviously stop hogging the mic. But would you mind, I think a lot of people that listen to sports radio just think like anybody can walk in there and talk sports, and it's just super easy, and there's no preparation or thought put into it. Would you mind peeling back the curtain a little bit and talking about what goes into getting ready for a 3 or 4 hour show, and what makes somebody good at that, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, so my show, since my show's on 6 to 7, it's only an hour, but it is just me. I usually get up every day, probably around 2:30 or 3. So yeah, this is I'm usually getting in bed here pretty soon. Then a lot of the prep work I try and do the day before, but because my show and our shows are so timely, it's also, you have to be, whatever you've done the night before, you have to be ready. And this has happened to me, to throw out your entire game plan and be ready to go with something else. And that was been a hard lesson for me. I'm a preparation nerd. I like to be over prepared. And so being able to go on the fly, with something has been a learning lesson for me. As for Brock and Salk, a big part of when I started interning and producing there, they are some of the most hardworking, dedicated, passionate people. I'm really blessed to work with them because they're all so dedicated to their craft. And as you know, none of them really do one thing either. Salk is in sort of management role, and then Brock, is traipsing around the country constantly, to do college football and doing radio hits and TV hits. And so, and yet they have so much dedication to their own show. And I'm so impressed and inspired by that. We all, like the day before, usually circulate an email between all of us and sort of go over our rundown for the show. A lot of other areas or shows I've been on, they'll just kind of leave that entirely to the producer, and they'll say, hey, just come up with my show, book my guests, do this for me, give me a show sheet of facts that I can read off of. And but that's not the case. They're very involved, which is cool. And so we kind of do the show prep the night before. We know what we're going to talk about. But again, you kind of have to be ready in case that goes on the fly. Any sort of like sound or anything that you hear on the show, a lot of times that's, again, you have to cut up your own sound. You have to just be constantly looking for that. So yeah, it's kind of as Brock said to me, like when I was still an intern, you kind of have to be obsessed with it. You kind of have to be constantly trying to improve and create your craft, which has been a lot of fun. It's sports after all. So at the end of the day, you're having a lot of fun doing it, but it is like a lot you'll learn. It's a lot of work and a lot of unglamorous, not as cool stuff probably as you would have thought. So
yeah, before we let you go, any other questions that you guys have for Lydia?
I'll ask one. Yeah, Lydia, for you, but if you don't know me, I was in a very similar position to you in 2010 in Canada.
Oh, no.
And I started in radio. I became a website writer. And when the Seahawks played in Toronto 2012 against Buffalo, I got to cover that game. Everyone knew I was a fan, so they let me do that. I don't know if you've had any stories like this, but one of my eye-opening memories of that game is, do you remember Alan Branch and Red Bryant?
Yeah, well, yeah.
The locker room, and this is like my boyhood team, like my favorite team. And the first thing I see is those two guys butt naked. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
You had any like eye-opening moments like that, like anything crazy like that? It's like covering their favorite team.
No, I mean, again,
those are big dudes, man. It was crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like we just started a Jeff Simmons therapy session. Lydia's talking to like totally deflect.
I love it. Oh, tell me your problems, Jeff. No, it's I would agree.
Take a while.
Yeah, there's a level of peeling back the curtain. They kind of say, I don't want to liken it to this, but how they say like, don't meet your heroes. I wouldn't take it to that degree, but there also is this level of, once you see what's going on behind all of the scenes, I'm not saying you become desensitized to seeing like grown naked men in the locker room or anything, but you kind of, it takes on a different view for you. And you learn to view a lot of these people as real people as opposed to being a fan. And they're totally normal and they're weird, just like the rest of us, and boring sometimes, just like the rest of us. And sometimes shy, just like the rest of us. So that was probably, I've never seen any grown men totally naked, not yet, but there's still time. I guess.
Who to talk to when that time comes. Jeff will be the one cowering in the corner. Hey, listen, I want to make sure you get some sleep for your show tomorrow. It was really nice of you coming on. We'd love to have you back. And consider this just a first visit.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you having me and stuff, chatting.
Thanks, Lydia. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
So, wow, Lydia's great. I think she's a rising star. And I think we're going to hear a lot more from her in the coming years. She's smart. She cares. She knows Seattle sports deeply. And as she said, is a yes person and positive energy. So she's like a, somehow related to Evan, I feel like, like the positive energy, Seattle, sports person. It's two peas in a pod. So I'm curious, guys. We started talking about the coaching stuff. A few other things came out since we last talked. I think the Michael Barrow news came out after that. It was the other assistant head coach on the defensive side that got let go. The Canales news came out. What else? Other coaching news?
Farwell's interviewing elsewhere, I think.
Yeah, Carolina.
Heath Farwell?
Yep.
Wow.
And that's Chris Richard is the passing coordinator in Dallas.
Yeah, exactly. He's defensive backs coach and passing coordinator.
It's just like a fancy. They just threw him a bone on the secondary position coach, right? I mean, really, like it's like how Cable was assistant head coach or the run game coordinator. I mean, who knows what the responsibilities actually are, but that's maybe just him getting a little bump in his title.
Yeah, like what does it look like for Chris Richard to coordinate the passing game, though?
It's just so odd. It makes it feel so like I work in tech. It feels like it'd be making me like a chef at Daniel's Broiler tomorrow night. Like what? Like I don't understand the translation at all.
He's an offensive passing game coordinator, right? A defensive passing game coordinator.
No, offensive passing game coordinator and secondary, like defensive backs coach. Two titles. One's on offense, one's on defense. I think Nathan's just catching up to why we think this is weird.
That's my confusion. It makes no sense.
Oh, all right. That doesn't make any sense.
Seeing the big cogs, crank away at Nathan's noggin there. It's great. Yeah, it's weird, right? I think I'm one of the only people that's not sad that Richard's moving on. Like I don't have any. I'm not really worried about him moving on. It's more about who's replacing him. Have we heard anything other than Ken Norton? Have we heard any? Oh, Travis Jones was the other one. I think that was the one I was trying to remember. He was the defensive line coach from 2013 to like 17. I think he'd formerly been with New Orleans. Pretty highly thought of, and he's leaving. So that's another vacancy. Like, I don't know if this is right, and I haven't been able to really figure out a good way to quantify this. I don't think I've ever seen a larger coaching turnover for the Seahawks. Like, even when Pete Carroll took over, he kept some of the staff from Jim Mora. When Jim Mora took over, he definitely took a lot of the staff that was with Holmgren. Closest thing I can think of is when Holmgren took over back in '99. He brought in Fritz Shermer. He brought in like a lot of his own people. I don't know if it was everybody, but can you guys remember a situation where there's been this much coaching change in one season?
Not me. I mean, we're at the point where it's quicker to name the people who are still here, right? I mean, it's like Canales and Hurt and who?
Nate Carroll.
Yeah, the Carrolls are all safe. Thank God. I mean, there's brain drain and then there's brain drain. No, special teams, though, didn't get touched, which is kind of weird because special teams wasn't great. So there's that.
Yeah, which is one of the ones I kind of question, honestly. Like, I don't think special teams has been very good for the past few years, and there's been some questionable decisions there as well. And we give certain coaches a lot of crap about personnel, but I would bet Brian Schneider had some say in whether John Ryan and Stephen Hashko stuck around or were let go. And anyway, I think he's gotten off scot-free, frankly.
And we've confirmed he's not related to John?
He's not related to John. I was about to say that.
Okay.
There's no nepotism in football.
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, so it feels like there's been way more exits than entries. Like, I haven't heard a lot of other names come up so far, other than, I mean, Canales is just a reshuffling. We just heard that the Seahawks had reached out to the Cardinals about their wide receivers coach and were denied. Which is kind of interesting because you'd think that they just elevate Nate Carroll, who was the assistant wide receivers coach. If Canales is going to be QB coach, you just think that they'd elevate his son to be wide receivers coach, but maybe he's not ready.
Yeah, I mean, the other name I heard for wide receiver coach was John Morton, and I don't know if that makes any sense. I think he was just fired from Philadelphia, right? Or not Philadelphia, the Jets. Is their offensive coordinator.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he worked with Pete back in USC, but I don't know if if he was a wide receiver coach.
By the way, I'm getting some comments in the chat pod from our smarter chat folks who are saying that Pro Football Talk is calling Chris Richard the defensive passing game coordinator.
Okay. All right. That makes sense now.
Okay, so then the question becomes, has anyone ever heard of a defensive passing game coordinator? Like, what the hell does that mean?
It's their attempt to lure Earl Thomas to Dallas. That's my guess.
Stop it, Jeff. Stop.
I know. I'm neurotic. I've been freaking out.
You're not trading Earl Thomas. The Seahawks are not trading Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas is dying in a Seahawks uniform.
Who wins for you, Evan? If John Schneider trades Earl Thomas, where does your heart go on that? Do you become a Cowboy fan? Do you forsake John Schneider, or how does that work?
I got loyalty to the franchise, but
oh, okay.
I mean, oh God, that would hurt, a trade of Earl Thomas to the Cowboys. I mean, oh God, the compensation better be nice. That's all I gotta say.
Maybe like a third rounder.
Yeah, like 10 of them. Yeah.
I hated that my neurotic side came out when I saw Richard to Dallas. That was my first thought, and
God.
I know. I had the same reaction.
It makes some sense.
I think those two are pretty tight.
You know, they talk about the personnel changes. I mean, first comes the coaches, and then the concept would be that they'd start looking at personnel makeover. Honestly, like I'm not so sure about how much turnover there's going to be on the player side. I mean, I think if you turn over the coaches the way you've turned over the coaches, and then you turn over the players in some massive way, beyond just the free agents, there's already going to be a lot of turnover just if you don't re-sign a bunch of the unrestricted free agents. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around that they're going to trade an Earl Thomas or Richard Sherman. Michael Bennett we've talked about. Like, I'm starting to think they're going to hold on to a decent chunk of those guys. Do you guys have a different instinct looking at that? I mean, Evan, you just wrote this article. Wonderful 4,000 word article.
Was it really 4,000 words?
I think that's what I saw. It was a lot of words.
Oh my God.
They were well chosen words, though.
I appreciate that. If we're not talking about free agents, one name that has kind of popped back into my head repeatedly, and I wouldn't be a fan of this move, I don't think, is Justin Britt. And let me tell you why. There's obviously the Davis Hsu rumor that, they're going to give Solari control to redo the entire offensive line except for Dwayne Brown. Don't know the credibility to that, but if it's true, Justin Britt, when I wrote and broke down his contract on Hawk Blogger when he got his extension, the Seahawks implemented this really weird option that allowed them to get out of the contract or cut him or trade him with not a significant amount of dead money capital hitting them. And that little 5-day window was that 5-day window immediately following the 2018 Super Bowl. And that is very interesting to me. It's not a common option bonus that they implemented in his contract. It's extremely rare and it's just not a common contract thing, especially for the Seahawks to do that. So everything they do is, has a reason associated to it. So I'm not saying they're absolutely going to trade Justin Britt, and I'm not saying I want them to trade Justin Britt, but it just happened, like those maybe two coincidental factors that make me wonder if, there's all this talk about the defensive side of the ball and maybe trading Earl Thomas, trading Michael Bennett, and trading maybe KJ Wright, all that crazy stuff. Maybe we haven't considered somebody on the offense, and maybe it could be Justin Britt, but I think it's unlikely overall. So
I mean, they did turn around and draft a center after they signed him to a contract that they have an out on.
That's the other point to this that I completely forgot about. Nathan, thank you. It's obviously that Ethan Pochik could slide in at center. So it's several coincidental factors that, I don't think it makes it like a crazy conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I'll admit that I was going through and looking at like, man, I wouldn't sign Justin Britt to an extension, and then I realized that they already had, and I'm like, damn it, because I mean, yes, he was an alternate for the Pro Bowl last year, but I just think he's like slightly above average center. I don't think he's great, and in this situation, I would 100% walk away from Justin Britt and have Ethan Posick at center and look at, other guys at guards. I think they've got some other option at guard, but I don't know. I mean,
people bring up the excuse though of like where it's not an excuse, but bring up the question of like, where are you going to spend that money then? And that's a valid question. But to me, it's more about what draft picks can you get in return? Because obviously we have a huge gaping hole in this upcoming draft. And if you could flip them for some picks and offload some salary, depending on the compensation, I think it's worth considering.
How much salary cap space might you gain by moving on from him?
Oh God, it's so complicated. Gain, it's not much. Like it's more about cleaning the slate in future years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like a few million, I think, off the top of my head. I'd have to double check.
Did you guys see, I mean, talk about this weird and lame state of offensive lines in the NFL. Did you see that Dwayne Brown got added to the Pro Bowl roster?
What?
Yeah, today.
I mean,
that's a reputation vote, though. I mean, that's a legacy thing. Like,
what, he played 6 games this year?
I know.
And not great.
Well, Derek Carr was also submitted to the Pro Bowl, was he not?
Yeah,
there are worse choices.
So.
Yeah, I don't know. That was just crazy to me. But kind of changing the subject a little bit. I want to get back to your article in a second, Evan. But obviously they had the conference championship games this weekend, and I'm curious, like, what you guys took away from those games. What your impressions were. Anything that made you think about the Seahawks and what they need to do relative to what the current state of the best teams in the NFL looks like.
I'll start. I think they got to make – my takeaway was that I hope Pete Carroll was watching those games because you saw a lot of what Seattle doesn't have. You saw a running back screen game. Philly used it really well. New England used it really well. Jacksonville did some really good stuff early in the game before they lost all their balls and got too conservative. They were able to – you saw Philly, how good they were protecting the quarterback. So I think – and I think with Russell, we saw how difficult everything was on him this year. And when you saw what Brady was doing and we saw how seamless it was for Foles with that offensive line against a great defense, I think the number one thing that Seattle needs to do is they need to make things easier on Russell. And yeah, Russell has some issues. He's been part of the struggles at first, but whether that's offensive line, whether that's getting a wide receiver, a running back screen game, I think that was my takeaway, just the difference in those teams and what Seattle was this year.
Nathan, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know. It was, I mean, not to harp on the run stuff again, if we can go there if we want. I mean,
yeah.
I think that for all the credit that Leonard Fournette has gotten this year and all the talk about the Jags, running the Seahawks blueprint and all that, they lost because they got stubborn about running the ball and they couldn't run the ball well, even though they spent the 4th overall pick on a running back. And they, pissed away a 10-point lead. So I think that you saw a lot of the storylines there around drafting a running back high or, depending on the run game, all of that kind of fell apart. And, when push came to shove and you had a good Jags team facing off against a good Patriots team, and, both teams with their weaknesses, Blake Bortles couldn't trust Blake Bortles to win a game. And so even the fact that they got up and even the fact that they have invested all this in a running game, and even though they were committed to the running game, they saw their lead slip away and they lost the game. And so I think, if there's questions about how Seattle should prioritize this offseason, prioritize their draft, I think you saw that, at the very least, taking a running back that high was a mistake. And then you can look at the other side with the Vikings and wonder, Dalvin Cook got hurt. And so obviously, pretty much any pick would have been a better pick than Dalvin Cook for this year. But you saw how productive they could be, or, how much they could get out of their running game without Dalvin Cook, right? And so imagine if they had actually applied that pick to a position that was useful and just ran with McKinnon and, Murray all year long. I mean, maybe that game was a blowout, so who knows? But, maybe that's the difference, and maybe that keeps them in it, and maybe they're going to the Super Bowl now instead of, going home. So I thought a lot of those kind of storylines fell apart.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces with the passing Nazis that are out there that I question is there's no doubt that if you can have somebody that is highly efficient passing the ball, that you want to have them doing that more often. I think in almost all situations. I think what gets lost sometimes is that there's just not that many guys truly capable of doing, for example, what Tom Brady does. Like, I don't know that if the Jaguars had put it on Blake Bortles' shoulders earlier in that fourth quarter, whether it would have turned out well. It might have. Certainly, I think we can all agree that they got really repetitive and conservative with their play calling in that fourth quarter. It wasn't even like just, hey, they're running the ball, being conservative. They were running the same play straight up the middle over and over and over again and getting very few yards. So that seemed questionable, if nothing else. But I don't think any of us would say that Blake Bortles is comparable to Tom Brady or someone that you could trust to be as efficient in the passing game as Tom Brady. So, I just think there's a reason there's very few of those elite quarterbacks that what makes them elite is they consistently make good choices and they optimize risk, versus reward on every play. And if you have someone that can do that really well, then you can really make hay. I just don't know that if the Jags really, I think Bortles played a good game. I just don't know if he would have done it down the stretch.
Right. And that's what, they could have had Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson got hurt, but who knows how that would have turned out for Jacksonville. They could have had Patrick Mahomes, they could have addressed that quarterback situation otherwise, and they didn't. He chose to go with, pouring a ton of investment into a running back, and it was useless for them. That team.
I don't know if you can say it was useless. I mean, I think that if you look at the way the teams had TJ Yeldon and they've had guys like Chris Ivory or whatever before. I think you could argue that whether or not Fournette needed to be the guy, it absolutely gave them an identity that they committed to and, focused their offense around and gave them some consistency that Bortles has never been able to give them. So I don't know if you could say he was useless. But I get your point. I'm not a huge proponent of using significant draft capital on running backs.
But Ben from Twitter, everyone knows and loves Ben. Ben was pointing this out, that if Dalvin Cook doesn't get hurt early in the year, everyone's saying the same thing about Minnesota that they've been saying about Jacksonville. But Dalvin Cook gets hurt, and Minnesota is with Case Keenum is able to, use that running game, and they ran a lot. They also didn't run well, but they also didn't, spend the fourth overall pick. And they could have not spent that second round pick on Cook and still gotten that same production out of Murray and McKinnon. So, with say that, I don't know, maybe drafting a running back fourth overall forced them to run the ball and force them to go away from Blake Bortles, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that was a pretty useless pick. I mean, it certainly could have been used a lot better in a lot of other ways.
Evan, look like you're about to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree really on the running back situation. The only thing that really strikes me was before the fourth quarter collapsed by the Jags defense, that 10-point lead, nothing. Seahawks fans have never seen anything similar, in a game against Tom Brady like that or anything like that. But
if only the Jaguars had Dan Quinn, it would have gone so much better for them.
Oh my God! Don't get me started, dude. I will take that down.
Third and 18 zone coverage. We've seen that before, right?
No, I just hope Pete was inspired by the youthfulness out of that Jags defense and the nastiness they had. They weren't the 2013 Seahawks, but that defense was nasty this year. And I really hope we get back to something like that and, draft a couple of young stud cornerbacks to fill up that group. Let's get some shit talkers back in the secondary. Besides that, how embarrassing was that performance by Minnesota?
That was a shock of the weekend for me, guys. I didn't think there was much question that Minnesota was going to win that game. I really didn't.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Way more respect for Minnesota's defense than I do for the Eagles' defense. I thought Keenum was a better quarterback this year, especially than Foles has been. I think I have a lot of respect for Zimmer as a head coach and what he does with getting his team ready for these games. I didn't watch the whole game. I kind of was done after the Patriots did it again. But Jeff, I mean, what was your take on that game?
That was an all-time no-show. That was as bad as a performance in a big game as I've almost ever seen. That was like Denver in the Super Bowl 48. But just it's one thing to get killed by like the 2013 Seahawks, to get killed by Nick Foles and make him look like a all-pro quarterback. That was embarrassing. And Harrison Smith, a guy that some people think is better than Earl Thomas, he just got roasted all game.
He did.
It was stunning because Minnesota, the way they played all year, they were so consistent and they were so good and they were so competitive. I didn't see it coming from a mile away.
Does anyone believe that the Eagles can beat the Patriots?
Absolutely not.
Jeff?
They'll have to play a perfect game. I think they have the defense to give Brady problems. That front four is really good, and they can get after Brady. But I just don't see it. Foles.
No, yeah, it's tough to see. Yeah, the Foles thing is what it really comes back to. I mean, I didn't think that either the Vikings or the Eagles stood a chance because I didn't think the Patriots were going to lose to Nick Foles or Case Keenum.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. All right, here's a trivia question for you guys. What is the Seahawks' combined record against the two Super Bowl teams since Pete Carroll's taken over as head coach?
Are we including playoffs?
Yeah. Including playoffs.
Oh.
I think it's 5-1.
Yeah.
Any other guesses? We got 2-5.
Oh, no, 6-1 because they played them way back in 2011, the Eagles. So yeah, 6-1, right?
Oh yeah.
You care to join that?
I remember this stuff.
Got it. You are correct. They are 6-1, and I always love to bring it up to people. The one is a big one, right? But you looking at the Patriots game and watching that, I think almost anybody just watches that and is like, Jesus, Brady's down Edelman, he's down Gronkowski, the defense is out of, doesn't have Donta Hightower. Like, you can go on down the line. They're just decimated. And he goes up against the number one defense in the league and comes back from 10 points in the fourth quarter and makes it look pretty matter of fact, right? And you're like, nobody can beat this team when it matters. And then I look at it, and the Seahawks have played them 3 times in the Pete Carroll era. They're 2-1 against. They're one of only a handful of teams that have a winning record against the Patriots in the last 7 years. And the one loss was them sitting at the 1 yard line with every reason to believe that they were going to win. So like, it's interesting to me in a way. Like, they did lose that game, but they lost it in a lot of ways. And we could have been in a situation where we're talking about that the Seahawks have Tom Brady's number and Bill Belichick's number, that they beat him every single time. The one time they lost, not only were they on the 1 yard line, but they were decimated injury-wise on defense. I mean, the entire secondary was hurt, and they lost a lot of people in that game. I think people forget that. The Seahawks have played quite well against Bill Belichick and Tom Brady in the time that they've played against him.
Yeah, that win in New England a couple years ago.
That was last year.
Or was that last year?
That was last year.
So long ago.
Oh my God. Mid-20s life crisis. Yeah, no, that's just one of the most satisfying wins.
I mean, that was with George Fant at left tackle and Jermaine Ifedi at guard, like, and on down the line. I mean, it was.
Did Baldwin have like 3 touchdowns or something?
He had a great game, and part of what it was making me think about it is Seahawks had a similar thing at the very end of that game. Brady marched him down the field. They're at the goal line with a chance to win it, and Cam Chancellor, knocked away the ball from Gronkowski. They stood up to Tom Brady on his home field in that situation and came away with the victory last year. Yeah. So I don't know. And the Eagles, the Seahawks are undefeated against the Eagles. They haven't lost. They haven't beaten them by less than 10 points. And during the Pete Carroll era, including this year when they beat him by 2 touchdowns with Carson Wentz, by the way. So I don't know, like, you can't do the transference, property, but like, football's a weird freaking game, right? Like, I don't know how you explain what the Seahawks have done in certain games and their total lack of consistency across the other parts of the season.
Yeah, they're 6-1 against the Patriots and the Eagles, and they're like, I don't know, 1-6 or worse against or whatever they are against the Rams, like
right.
The Jeff Fisher Rams. I mean, yeah, so much of it is kind of a game of matchups, I guess. I don't know. It's weird though.
Yeah. So, and closing up, when we got maybe 10 or 15 minutes left here. How do you guys turn the page from what we saw in the conference championships? And then, Evan, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what you wrote. You talked to Joel Corey, who we've had on this show, former agent. You talked to Jason over at Over the Cap. We talked about some of the free agents the Seahawks have. What's your expectation after you did that research about what's going to happen? Any of them that you expect them to keep? Who do you expect to go? And are there any draft picks you expect the Seahawks? Like, you think anyone's going to get paid big and give Seahawks some good draft comp?
The one player I think that they actually might keep, this is just purely based off intuition, I think they're going to keep Bradley McDougald. I just get that sense. He really stepped in. What was that?
Nathan doesn't like it.
I'm not. I don't like it either. I want them to walk from him, but he did a really good job of coming in and sliding in for Cam, and I think he's one player that they'll keep. But talking with Joel and Jason, they were really just railing on some of the Seahawks offseason decisions from 2017, signing Lacey, signing Luke Jokel, Blair Walsh, all those guys.
Not a fan of Sheldon Richardson.
Not a fan. That's the big one for Jason. Jason Fitzgerald is like, he's a Jets fan, obviously, like longtime suffering New York Jets fan, is like staunchly opposed to extending Sheldon Richardson. The one thing he said is he thought like Sheldon might mail it in the second he gets an extension. He just has questions around his motivation, all that type of stuff. Maybe that's from some scarring in New York. That might be it there. But yeah, Jason is like really, really opposed to the Seahawks.
Let somebody else spend millions of dollars on that guy, please.
He's just not. I'm telling you, I think he's going to ask for low teens or mid teens, and I just don't think he's worth it. I really don't.
Well, I mean, the Seahawks are going to get screwed if he does what that was talked about in that article, which is that he'll take a 1-year deal maybe for $8 or $9 million on a prove-it contract. If that happens, the Seahawks get nothing in comp pick.
I just don't see that. It's a weak defensive line free agency group, and there's too many teams with money. I think someone's going to spend on him. Yeah,
somebody with a lot of cap space might just throw the cash at him. Niners, Raiders. Raiders.
There's a lot of dumb teams out there.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
If Mike Glennon can get 3 years and $45 million, Sheldon Richardson can get 3 years and $45 million.
Quarterbacks are a whole different beast.
This is true.
Have you seen the length of Glennon's neck? I mean, I think that's like
he's a giraffe.
$1 per vertebrae or something like that.
Yeah, he's a giraffe. That whole contract situation.
I call him the ostrich. Draft's good.
But yeah, just kind of like going over the article. I really think they got to get away from the middle class. I really think they got to take some risks. One big risk I love to see them take is Delano, however you say his name, Delano Hill. I would love to see them give him an opportunity. I think you got to utilize those valuable young years in his rookie deal. And, we've seen very limited action from him, but I think he's somebody we need to give an opportunity to. He could really outperform expectations. So generally, I'd love to see them stray away from signing anybody big except for Andrew Norwell in free agency. So hopefully it's a quiet free agency, for guys coming in.
Did you ask by any chance those guys what they think Norwell is going to command in free agency?
I looked up some previous conversations from a few weeks ago with Jason, and I remember he floated out the 13 number. The guard market was just set by Kevin Zeitler last year of the Cleveland Browns, and I believe he got $12 million a year. So if Andrew Norwell, who was just selected to All-Pro this year, didn't allow a single hit on Cam Newton this year, sets the market, it would be about $13 million a year. So I think that could be the number Norwell's looking for.
That's a lot of money for a guard.
It is, but a 26-year-old first-team All-Pro guard. I mean, I think you could spend money in worse ways.
Well, we've seen them spend money in worse ways, but
They've done a lot.
That's like Luke Jokel and Eddie Lacy last year.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Oh, my God, Brian. You and I just got the exact same thing. I was going to say it's Eddie Lacy and Luke Jokel combined from last season. You let Sheldon walk, there's money. You let Jimmy Graham walk, there's money. There's some money they can play with.
There's money. I look at like John Ryan and Bradley McDougall. Those are two guys even that that's potentially $5 million of cap space you can spend someplace. I don't know.
Lane.
Yeah, Jeremy Lane. Oh my gosh. I only blew a .03, and I did tell him I just got high recently, but
that was
such a. I bet his lawyer and his PR people really wish he hadn't tweeted about that.
Did you notice the wording though? He was like, "I was just high this time." It was just kind of like, bro, come on, like just. I don't know. The wording I think is kind of funny to me. But I just thought of something. If you cut Jeremy Lane and you let Cliff Averill walk, that's almost an Andrew Norwell right there. That's like $11.5, $12 million.
Oh, Nathan, would you oppose that?
no, I guess not. It's fine. It's hard for me to get. Did anybody know this guy's name? Even before he got named to the All-Pro team, did you know? If I told you in week 10 about Andrew Norwell that maybe the Seahawks could sign, he's gonna be a free agent, would you have known anything about this dude? Which isn't to say that he's not good. I mean, he's in Carolina and he's an offensive lineman. They don't get stats. Maybe he's been fantastic for years now, but it's just a little.
I think that's a fair point to bring up, Jeff. This is not Kelechi Osemele, who was a no-brainer, surefire, had been practically Pro Bowl level at both left tackle and guard in his time at Baltimore, and was young. That guy was a no-brainer. Norwell has not been that so far. I think he's been good, but this year he kind of popped a little bit more. Do you think it's worth the risk of spending that kind of money on a guy that maybe hasn't been performing consistently at this level?
Sure. Now that they have an offensive line coach who might actually be able to coach offensive linemen, I would take that risk. But overall, in general, the Seahawks got to get better in free agency. If you look at the Eagles and the Patriots, none of them really got a ton out of their drafts last year. They're both going to the Super Bowl. The Seahawks aren't going to have a ton of picks this year. I think Andrew Brandt tweeted out all like the 1-year signings the Eagles made last year. Patrick Robinson was one of them. Chris Long, Torrey Smith, Alshon Jeffrey, LeGarrette Blount. You can find value in free agency. Seattle tried to do it last year, but they pretty much missed on every guy with Lacey and Jokel, and the Eagles did the same strategy as them. They just hit on their guys. And Blair Walsh, they pretty much went 0-4 in free agency. Vladimir McDougald is fine, but overall, if you look at the last couple of years, there's Kerry Williams, and the Seahawks haven't been great in free agency. And earlier in the years with defensive linemen, they were really solid at finding low-cost value guys. There was Alan Branch and Tony McDaniel and a couple guys there to plug and play. They got Averill and Bennett on 1-year deals. I don't know if Norwell's the safest play, but I think you got to start looking at some value signings. Maybe not the middle class, but like I know Evan mentioned Dante Moncrief in his article. That's another guy I would take a shot on. And if you look at Schneider and the personnel team, like they need to get better at pro scouting because they've missed on a lot of guys lately, and it's really set them back.
Well, last thing I'll ask for tonight, and then we'll adjourn for the evening. Is I think you made great points about value signings, and Seahawks have done that before, but not necessarily right now. Is obviously we're getting started to go into draft season a little bit. Senior Bowl's this week. You're starting to see measurements come out. We've also seen mock drafts, take flight. Two that I'd call out. One, Daniel Jeremiah at Move the Sticks on Twitter. I highly recommend following him. He had Isaiah Oliver, a cornerback from Colorado, going to the Seahawks at 18. Mel Kiper, who everybody knows, had Derwin James going to the Seahawks, I believe. I'll double check that. But I'm curious, Nathan, for example, what's your take of the idea that they might take a cornerback at that spot?
I don't have a problem with it. Like if there's a cornerback that they love and they want to go grab him, that's fine. I would be shocked at this point to see it. I feel like we do this every year. We talk about, well, maybe this is the year. Maybe there's this corner and he could be there, and maybe this is, they got to get more cornerbacks, and they just don't do it. They've like last year it was like Kevin King. Will he get to Seattle? Well, he got to Seattle. Seattle traded back, and then he got to Seattle again. And then Seattle trades back. Like they're not. They're not going to take a cornerback high. I don't think it's not what they want to do. We'll see if losing Chris Richard changes all that. I don't think it will. So I have no problems with drafting cornerbacks high or in the first round. They're worth it. You saw what Marshawn Lattimore did for the Saints this year. I just don't think this team is going to actually do it.
Jeff, what's your take? I mean, Jeremiah actually has Derwin James going one spot earlier to the Chargers, and his comment is essentially James is the perfect safety for Gus Bradley's defense. And that made a lot of sense to me. And it was like anyone who's hoping that Derwin James falls to the Seahawks, they've got Gus Bradley one pick before them. It's probably going to be looking for a lot of similar stuff.
Yeah, James is a guy. I remember when we first started talking about the draft, safety was the position I called out as something I'd like to see them spend a high pick on early. The more I've started to dig into this draft class, James is one of like the blue chip players that I would stick and not trade down. I'm definitely okay with that. But the more I dig into it, I just don't see James getting to 18. I think he's a top 12 player in this draft, even with all the quarterbacks. I can't envision a scenario where he slips unless he has like a terrible combine or interviews horribly or tests poorly or has like a drug test issue. I just don't see him getting to 18. And in terms of a cornerback, it's like all these analysts forget how Seattle operates every year. They're not taking a cornerback in the first round. I'm with Nathan. I don't see it coming. If they didn't take Kevin King last year, who fit the mold, who was a local guy, I just don't see it. There's so many other areas they can go. And I think Pete is just of the belief that he can develop guys and doesn't need to spend high capital on it.
And he's proven that he can do that, right?
Say that again.
He's proven that he can do that. This team has a proven track record of being able to identify maybe some underrated talent and make them ballers, right?
I think they see cornerback the way Nathan sees running back.
No. I mean, I would quibble with you on that, but I don't think they devalue. But I don't think. I think they value cornerback performance and play.
Right.
I don't.
I forget that you don't value running back performance and play. So it's not the same.
Mostly, yeah, it's not the same.
But in terms of propensity for where they will spend that draft capital,
right?
I think they're looking to take cornerbacks later. This was Shaq Griffin. People forget was actually the first cornerback that they took ahead of the 4th round, and the cornerback that they took before that was in the 4th round wasn't Richard Sherman. It wasn't Brandon Browner, who wasn't drafted by us. It wasn't Byron Maxwell. It was Walter Thurmond, and that was in 2010. So, yeah, it's not a position that they generally take early. And last year was flush with cornerbacks. So it's almost like they had to take somebody. Thank God they did. It's interesting. This is why I brought it up, because I actually think Daniel Jeremiah is one of the better draft guys and knows the Seahawks reasonably well. And when he had a cornerback at 18, I took like a triple take. I was like, what? But anyway, we'll have plenty of time to talk more draft. Let's wrap it up there. Thank you guys for taking another Tuesday night. Thank you to Lydia Cruz for joining. Please make sure you follow Lydia on Twitter if you don't already. She's at Lydia Cruz, LYDIA CRUZ. She's one of just a bunch of guests we're going to keep coming on the show over time. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thank you for all the folks that have subscribed. We got up over 1,000 subscribers last week. That was great. Keeps us as a partner with Twitter, which gets us, access to more things, which we'll find out about as they roll out their partner program for us. But also make sure if you are a Hawk Blogger follower, please sign up on patreon.com, patreon.com/hawkblogger. Still time to do that. We're going to have plenty of off-season content. Nathan wrote a great article this week on, or I think it was last week actually, on Mike Solari. I recommend you check that out if you haven't already. Evan wrote his article this week. I've been working on a bunch of stuff related to breaking down how the Seahawks ended this season, statistically, and where that looks trend-wise over the last few years, as well as, what needs to happen in this offseason and what the priorities should be. So a lot of good stuff coming. Great to have you aboard. So with that, guys, have a great rest of your night. Go Hawks.
There's 7 Seahawks in the Pro Bowl this week.
Oh, my God, right?
Nobody cares about the Pro Bowl.
Oh, my God. We'll not watch a second of that.
The NCAA football used to have these mini games in it, like the video game. You have mini games. I think the Pro Bowl should take those mini games and make them actual games. They used to do this tug of war thing, and they used to do this like in zone, like bowling. They call it bowling. Fantastic ideas for the Pro Bowl. They should get creative with this and actually do stuff.
You're kind of talking
but until
like
then,
Battle of the Network Stars style is what you're kind of talking about, like crazy.
No, like not actually playing a football game.
Yeah, right.
Change the format of football. Like I don't want to put like celebrities in the game. Although it would be cool to watch like Kevin Hart get depleted by somebody. Nothing against Kevin Hart, but anyways.
Awesome. Take care, guys.